Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and I'll be your guide on this journey from consciousness to cluelessness and back around again. Today on the podcast, I talk to Unny Nambudiripad. Unny cultivates capacity for social change, in particular for non-human animals. He brings together communities to heal emotionally, spiritually, physically, and socially to help us be more loving, compassionate, and sustainable activists. In this episode, Unny and I talk about showing up as our authentic selves, having humility for where everyone is at on their journey, and he tells a story about a sheep named Frederick raised by dogs. Here we go. So the podcast is called Consciously Clueless, and I chose that because I realized for myself I was exploring this space where, you wake up some days and you're like, oh, I'm feeling really with it. I'm so there. I'm conscious. I'm on top of it. And then there's those days you wake up and you're like, I'm totally clueless. I have no idea what I'm doing in this life. And everything in between, right? That's part of it. So I'm wondering, the question I like to ask people to start is, where are you at right now on that spectrum of conscious to clueless, right in this moment?
Yeah, I think, Carly, that I feel relatively conscious. I have some clarity about things I want to do. Those things seem to be moving forward. I feel good about that. I feel confident that these are in alignment with my highest values. And so that's good. But I had a destabilizing week last week, and I was asking some hard questions about, am I is there some behavior that I've been doing that has been harmful, and that do I need to cultivate some more humility, and also really struggling with conflict and with feeling that somebody I was saying last Monday night, after this conflict I was feeling vindictive self-righteousness, and I was giving myself space for that, right? But and I had kind of an emotional hangover the next day. And does that make sense? Yeah. And
Yes.
So, I feel confident that the behavior of the other person is something that, doesn't work well for me. And, this is hard, but I don't, but I also, it asks some hard questions about me too. So, trying to hold all of this stuff without a lot of shame. That's like all of our actions, for some having conflict with my own, like what's happened in the past. And
Yeah, and I think there's a certain level of consciousness that's there, even just being able to ask those hard questions of ourselves, right? Because there's a lot of times you can move through life without asking the questions of how I played a part in this situation or what my role was or whatever that is.
Right. And there's that meta level where I'm thinking, well, gosh, I'm so smart that I even know to ask these questions, right? And I think that, the like a really humble spiritual approach to this is to really just to kind of let go, feeling attached to being right, and knowing that what I'm doing is like the best thing ever or anything like that. And yeah.
Those are hard life lessons, but they're important.
Yeah.
So you have a very long history in the animal rights world.
Yeah.
You've done so much work in Minnesota, as far as I know, mostly, correct?
Yeah. I've pretty much always lived here. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm curious, what is your becoming vegan story?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting. Even as soon as you said you have a long history, the first thing that comes to mind is I have mixed feelings about talking about it. I mean, the stuff that I've done, I feel such an honor and privilege to be able to do what I've done. But I also, I look at my past and I don't want that to define me, because I'm trying to do new things now. And the particular question that you ask about my vegan story is interesting. And I'll tell the story, and I'll tell you why, what's interesting about asking the question from that direction. So I my parents are immigrants from India, and they had come from a background for hundreds or maybe thousands of years of vegetarianism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's sometimes the ethical nature of that is a little unclear. It had evolved into both our religious and cultural practice. But there is a strong tradition. And so my family's Hindu. There's a strong tradition of really not having the boundaries of what we think about between humans and animals, and really thinking about suffering in individuals, and 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 good reason to believe that there was some ethical background to this vegetarianism. So, my parents came here before I was born, and growing up, I ate all vegetarian food at home, and my mom remained and still is a vegetarian. But my dad and my brothers and I ate meat growing up outside of the house.
Okay.
And the two turning factors, or a couple of the first turning factors in becoming vegan was first when I was about 10 years old in India, and I never had any companion animals growing up at home, but there was these semi-feral cats that my second cousin befriended, one of which he named Bobby after the American chess player, Bobby Fischer.
Bobby Fischer.
Yeah, you know that name. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually, it's funny because even then he was a historical figure, but I realized the second cousin of mine would have been old enough to know him when he was alive. And so he named this, obviously this is my second cousin, Narayan, and he liked to play chess. And we'd play chess together sometimes too. Anyway, this kitten was really adorable and friendly. And my brother Christian and I, we would throw Bobby and the other cat higher and higher. And yeah, and just learning this, how cats can land on their feet, and they did, but they started to run away from us when we did this. And Narayan said to us, like really calmly, with even voice, said, "If you keep doing that, they'll die." And I felt so ashamed. And I recognized then, it took a while to act on it, but I recognized I wouldn't want to hurt an animal if I could avoid that.
Yeah.
So this is now more than 30 years ago, and just thinking about these stories more recently, I hadn't really talked to anybody about it. And my second cousin Irani, he died a long time ago, but I asked my brother about this last year, and he remembers most of this, and it's pretty amazing to think how long ago this was. Anyway, the next story is when I was 19 and I went to India. So I would visit, would visit India for a few months every 3 years or so to see family. But that trip was different because it was the first time I really traveled throughout India with my brother and I, my brother Christian and I, without other relatives, and we just saw a lot. And at the end of the trip, I decided to become a vegetarian. And I think that, I wasn't motivated by health or ethics or environment, but it just felt like the right things to do in my, it's the tradition that my family did that felt right. And and it was very easy for me to do, having grown up with the food that I ate. I didn't have any questions about whether I would be healthy or not, or what I would eat, or anything like that.
Do you feel like when you were growing up and you were eating meat outside of the house, did you feel like you kind of had a foot in both worlds? Like your mom presenting vegetarian food and Hinduism, and then kind of like the Americanized Big Mac?
Yeah, definitely. But you know how it is when you're a kid, everything just seems normal, right?
Right.
And so I didn't think about it that way. But yeah, I mean, I felt equally comfortable. I loved to eat at Burger King and loved hamburgers. And when I would visit family in India and eat all vegetarian food, I loved that too. Either one was fine. And because my mom was very much, she never expressed her opinions or her values, or said that we should do things one way or the other. Because of that, I didn't even understand until I was an adult that that there was this idea that people had a problem with eating meat, or that there was
Oh,
anything
yeah,
ethically
yeah.
wrong. And actually, that's part of how I became vegan, is because still at the age of 19, I was completely unaware of that. And then I started talking to people, asking the question about the ethical, is it okay to hurt animals or not? And well, I had a specific conversation. This is only probably like a month or two after coming back from India. Uh, and I asked the question. The person I was asking knew I was vegetarian, but what they didn't
Mm-hmm.
know is that I didn't have any ethical inclination there. And so
Yeah.
when I was asking it, it was really an open question, and they got really defensive. And I was just like, "What's this about? I don't understand why somebody would be defensive. This is not how the
Yeah.
conversation would have went with my mom or anything, and or that she would have had it with somebody else.
Right.
It's not like that." And so anyway, that got me to ask questions,
Interesting.
and then involved in other activist things. And I knew people who were vegans and involved in animal advocacy, and I started talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
And once I started doing that, then shortly after that, I became vegan and got involved in animal advocacy.
And you co-founded Compassionate Action for Animals?
Yeah. So that that was like I said, I was involved in lots of activist things, and once I started doing animal advocacy, it really called to my heart.
Mm.
And I can give reasons of why I think it's an important issue, but I just really felt it deeply, that
Yeah.
of all the things I could work on, and I was already doing, yeah, so many different things, like trying to do the best for animals just really called to me. But I still cared about a lot of other issues, and did continue and still continue to work on things. And so just a year later, just a year after becoming vegan and being involved in animal advocacy, I understood this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I
Mm-hmm.
want to advocate for animals. I don't know what form it's going to take. And it's a really fortunate, it felt like a coincidence, but I was just talking to other people who shared a lot of similar values, and these
Mm-hmm.
conversations evolved into starting an organization, Compassion and Action for Animals. And I had the time and attention for it because I knew this was my number one life priority. But I
Yeah.
certainly didn't have any sense that like this was going to be the avenue in which I was going to be an animal advocate. And it ended up being the case. I mean, I co-founded that in 1998 and spent the next 18 years of my life, most of those years, with Compassion and Action for Animals. And eventually, a decade after I started it, as a part-time and then a full-time job too. So I got to spend a lot more time on that.
Well, it's an amazing organization.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Like I said when we originally connected, my coworker Adria was like, "You should talk to my friend." And I
Oh,
think I think it would be great if you had him on the podcast. And so then, of course, I was like, "Oh, who is this guy?" Like on the internet looking. I was like, "Oh, he co-founded this organization that I get their monthly emails and that I've followed for a long time. Like that's pretty amazing."
I didn't realize you worked with Adria. I was going to introduce
Yeah.
I was going to introduce you to Adria. I was thinking, oh, you should meet
Oh,
Adria.
no, we're coworkers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so we know each other.
Great, great. Yeah, I want to get back to what I was saying before about, the question that you asked. So, one of the reasons I left Compassion and Action for Animals is that I want to do more work outside of the personal consumption world and trying to change individual behavior in diets. And I
Mm,
really wanted to work on policy and look at structures and systems.
mm-hmm.
And my life has kind of meandered a bit, but because of that, I don't want the kind of work, which I still appreciate and I still participate and help out when I can with Compassion and Action for Animals. But I don't want it to define me because there's other things that I want to do in other perspectives, and I'm
Right,
learning and trying different things. And that's been a big challenge for me to do that, right? Because you do something for so long and it becomes so much of what you believe and how you see the world. But I knew
right.
that I want to I want to best model behavior I want from other people, which is to learn and grow.
So when you say you left to work more on like policy and systems change, are you saying that you are still in the animal advocacy realm, but working on systems and kind of policy or?
Well, what's ended up happening actually is that, yeah, I've continued to be involved in animal advocacy, and what I've stumbled upon as a little bit different direction is looking at capacity building in the movement, and
Hmm.
um, the um, the combination of both wellness and equity and animal advocacy.
Hmm.
And so some of the ways that's taken form is, I mentioned, yeah, I'm going to be planning a virtual retreat for animal advocates. That'll happen in February. And so I've done hosted a lot of meditations for animal advocates.
Okay.
And I hosted an in-person retreat a year and a half ago
Okay.
with a very small informal group called Our Wellness and Liberation, which we
Okay.
are trying to, yeah, foster wellness. And the idea is to really help animal advocates center their compassion and love in their work and in their advocacy.
Hmm.
So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect that complements it is looking at, justice issues and animal advocacy. So, I've been looking at anti-racism efforts and animal advocacy. And so a couple of examples of things I've done there is I joined the board of directors of Encompass that works on racial equity in the animal advocacy movement. They're a national/international organization.
Okay.
They do really great work. They consult with organizations to help with their racial equity work. They host conferences for people to learn about the issues, and they have community for BIPOC and people of the global majority, kind of a global term for people of
Oh,
color.
wow. That's
Those are
beautiful.
those are some of the activities that they do.
Mm-hmm.
I was also I was leading the Equity Advisory Committee for the Animal Rights National Conference.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and that, unfortunately, because of equity issues, it really, the conference was canceled. That's the simple way to explain what happened. But just some examples of things that I've been doing there. So I haven't really worked on that policy thing I was thinking,
Yeah.
but I mean, honestly, I'm glad I have space to just take where I feel called to go, and I feel so great about what I'm doing right now and the opportunities. It's been more or less all volunteer, so not so much
Okay.
as work, but it's, I want to just make sure I have time for the most important things in my life.
So, what called you into the space of wellness for animal advocates? Like, was that something you felt like you were filling a need because it's something you needed and never got, or like, where did that come from?
Yeah, there's a few different things that happened. Well, one is that it's something that I felt like I had for a long time in my life. Like I feel really good about having, put a lot of intentional time and effort around having balance in my life and having time for sleep and cooking and eating well and exercising regularly. And I feel like I've done that for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
But those things were just like what I did, but they were separate from the animal advocacy spaces that I was in.
Mm.
And so part of the thinking was like, oh, these individual practices that I have, what if we have community around those things so that advocates can do this to help them be advocates, also. So I said cultivating compassion and love, but also so that you can sustain it for a long time.
Yeah.
Also the other thing is I went to a meditation at the Animal Rights 2017, the Animal Rights National Conference in 2017.
Okay.
And the folks who led that, they had been both animal advocates and meditation leaders for a very long time. But those had been separate spaces. And this was the
Mm-hmm.
first time bringing those two together. And so they really understood where activists came from. And, in the realm of wellness and meditation, I've always associate a lot of spirituality and meditation as very individualistic,
Mm-hmm.
and it's for people who have the privilege to do that, and that's
Mm.
been like a big turnoff. But what I was seeing here is that when we combine these things together, it's giving ourselves space for wellness and healing, and in service of making change in the world and doing the best. And,
Yeah.
and the folks who led those meditations, they really understood where advocates came from and like what their experiences are in life, because they were also advocates, right? But they
Right.
also, they were meditation leaders who had a really great understanding of um, uh, of spirituality and um, just approaching things with a lot of love and compassion and humility. And I found that so inspiring. And that was the best part of any animal rights conference I'd ever been to. I'd been going to conferences for years, and we Compassion and Action for Animals hosted a few conferences before, and I thought, well, wow, this is really meaningful for me. So I really wanted to put more attention and time into that. I've had a long interest also in nonviolence, and I see this kind of spirituality, interpersonal nonviolence being effective and being involved in a movement for a long period of time. Pulling all these things together is what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah, totally. I got certified as a health and wellness coach, and I teach yoga, and I'm actually in a meditation course right now. And I always tell people that part of why I like doing that work and working with people and sharing about those things is because I think it better prepares people to show up for the world and make change in the world. So it's like almost this selfish endeavor. Like, I love doing this coaching or yoga class because I think it'll help people be better for the world, and it'll be better community. So it's a both and, totally.
Yeah, and there was another question that you asked, and I meant to say yes to that as well. I do feel like I've needed this for myself as well. A lot of the spiritual things, you just go through life and you face some hard things, and you really question yourselves at a really, really deep level, and experience some pain. And when that happens to me, a lot of the meditation and wisdom teachings that I've learned and benefited from have really helped me through that, and have really helped guide me. I should say that the work that I do, I really try to be both ecumenical and try to appeal to people of all or any or no religion or spirituality. I try to be as inclusive in that way as I can.
Mm-hmm. So that is one avenue that you're working down. And then you also described being in the world of animal advocacy and people of color and BIPOC individuals. So what got you down working with those intersections?
So in the rest of my life, sometimes I've been involved in, like I said, many other issues.
Yeah.
And and those have called to me, independently of being an animal advocate. Additionally, it's like when I think of compassion and justice in the world and what I want to, I see that the need for that in human work, and doing anti-racism work seems very important to me too. Obviously this is, as a person of color in this society, it's not hard for me to see the racism in our society.
Right.
But I see all kinds of just the oppression that exists, and I want to make a change in that regard. And so I I saw this as an opportunity to work on those values that matter to me as well. That I don't want to have to put I want to, maybe a theme for all of this is I want to try to show up in my full self, or find spaces and places to show up in my full self more. And being able to do this is more opportunity to show up as my full self. But I also think that, we can make the animal protection movement more powerful and more effective, and make a bigger difference for animals, right? So it's both because it's just, and because it's more powerful.
Right. Did you have any, and if you don't feel the need to share, you totally don't have to, but did you have any personal experiences in the animal rights world and the vegan world that you, as a person of color, were like, oh, there are issues here and we need to talk about these intersections? I interviewed someone, Zipporah, the vegan, and she is a Black woman, and if you don't follow her on Instagram, I would totally look her up, because she is dropping truth bombs all over the place about privilege and veganism. And it's really important as a white woman for me to like be continuing to confront these spaces, because it would be really easy for me to just be this like white vegan woman and not think about that.
Yeah, what I'll say is, I think one of the reasons that's kept me going in animal advocacy is that having been involved in many issues, I see it less in animal advocacy than I see it in a lot of other places.
Okay.
I think, uh, um, I think because people's focus on animals, they're um, less likely to be caught up in uh, um, racist thinking. But that said, but what I do see is, without challenging uh, conventional ways of thinking and living, and also because folks who are involved in the most prominent and best funded work tend to come from privileged backgrounds, it perpetuates racism and racist structures, and
Right.
and that's just like a default ignorant kind of thing, just like the rest of our society and the
Right.
structures. So yes, that I see everywhere, and you can see it in like when you talk about like it being easy to become vegan, or promoting foods that are pretty expensive, um, or like having voices that are from a very limited philosophical or narrative background that's like all about like white people stories, right?
Right.
And the animal advocacy has so much more, that it has like so much more diverse voices. There's so much more opportunity, including the the story that I was telling you a little bit of my own story, right?
Right.
Traditions that Hinduism and India has around vegetarianism that is really powerful and has a lot of potential.
Totally.
So yeah, I'm happy to say that my personal experiences have generally been pretty good, but at the same time, our movement just like really can easily. I don't want to. I have to be clear. I'll say the movement that's often most visible and best funded, because there hasn't been and there always is like the movement is really big.
Right.
There's a lot of things going on, and it's like
Yes.
paying attention to, and so there are a lot of things that are happening, and I don't want to downplay what a lot of leadership that has come from people of color.
But the mainstream, the
Right.
stories that make those kind of headlines or whatever it is,
Yeah,
tends to be more more privileged folks
right.
in those spaces. So I'm curious, knowing that you started that organization in, what did you say, 1998?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how has being vegan changed for you over the years? Because I've been vegan for a few years, so I've had like accessibility to food and information and stuff was just pretty easy for me, but things have changed so drastically.
Yeah, yeah, of course, things have changed really dramatically. And I even remember around the time I became vegan and I went to Uptown in Minneapolis, a place that like you would expect of all places, like, oh, people would know what the word vegan is.
Totally.
And even then, at that point, I don't even expect that anybody understands. I like explain the words, like, do you have anything that doesn't have meat, dairy, or eggs? And I remember a waiter responding, there's at some restaurant, and he said, oh yeah, we have things that are vegan. And I'm like, that's amazing that you know that word. Like, I just
Yeah.
that. And now I would just like use the word, right? It has changed so dramatically. And I mean, it seems like we're right in the middle of it right now too. It's only a couple of years ago that I'm like, okay, I can't keep up with all the new vegan ice creams and
Yeah.
plant-based meats and such. A few years before that I did. It was like, oh, there's a new one, let me try that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's been really fortunate. I think that I indicated that because of my background, becoming vegetarian was easy, and like I said, my family, the background was lacto vegetarian, so they just use milk. And because I've pretty much always, as an adult, had control over my food choices, and I'm cooking for myself and maybe other people, and not people who aren't vegan, and I don't have other people who are feeding me that aren't vegan, and because of my economic privilege and access to information about nutrition, and because of the places I've lived that had food choices, being vegan has always been a very easy thing for me. I've had to recognize that a lot of people's experiences are really different. But yeah, I mean, as far as the movement and the possibility right now, I mean, yeah, I'm really enthusiastic.
Yeah, there is, I think, a lack of understanding from some privileged vegans. I remember posting something on Instagram like a year or two ago about I was visiting my dad in Florida, and we went to a restaurant that had a ton of vegan options, and they accidentally put chicken in mine. And I was really nice, and the guy felt so terrible. And I was like, I know you didn't do this on purpose. Like, it's okay. They brought me a new one. And I posted on social media about how like nice they were and how you can spark conversations in these moments. And this woman responded to me, somebody I don't know, but somebody who's vegan. She's like, that's why I don't eat anywhere that isn't fully vegan and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, yeah, that must be nice. Like wherever you live that you have that option. But like I'm in Grand Marais, Minnesota most of the time, and I wouldn't eat out. There's no place that's fully vegan. I mean, I'm not eating out anywhere right now because of COVID, but still like just those comments where you're like, wow, you have no idea. Like that's a real privilege if you can be like, I don't eat anywhere but only vegan places. I'm like, whoa. All right.
Yeah, I think that this is such a good opportunity to have humility about everybody's journeys and choices.
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, I think the whole question of people becoming vegan, and we just have to look at everybody's lives are there's so many different, I kind of indicated some of the, like, access to information and food, and
Right.
um, and who is in your household, and who you're cooking with or for, and money, and all these things. And so we really have to let go of this idea that whatever we think the choice is best for us, that other people, their circumstances are the same. And instead, look at it as, can we empower people to make the best choices that they can?
That's a really good way to rephrase that. Because I know in the beginning, I did not see my own privilege in this movement. And I did not understand after I became vegan why everybody in my life wasn't following suit. I was just like, why aren't people listening to me? This is easy. I'm sure I use the word easy. Takes a step back and some self-reflection to be a little more thoughtful about how I share information and the way I talk about things.
Yeah, and to the folks who, I having spent so much time in animal advocacy and with animal advocates, I can really empathize with the anger and pain and frustration that animal advocates feel about what's happening to animals,
Yeah.
and kind of cruelty, right? And so when people are speaking vociferously and saying, you have to change right now, I mean, I can really empathize with that anger, because that's real. And
Totally.
I think that yeah, I hope that on the other side, I'm not shaming people for like being upset about this, especially when I see that, like, that's coming from such a great place of really, like,
Yeah.
wanting the best for animals. And one thing I've been thinking about is, anger often comes. I don't want to say necessarily always, but often comes when you don't feel very powerful.
Mm,
And so what you can, when you feel anger, you can reflect upon that. Okay, like, how and where am I not feeling powerful right now?
like
That
a
might be
loss of control.
right. And so, and empathize with that, right? And so then ask yourself, another question you can ask yourself is, how am I powerful? How can I be powerful? How can I, make the most difference, and flip that around, right? And how can I make the biggest difference for animals? And you might find yourself saying some different things, but um, I think that can be a really helpful exercise.
Wow, that's really powerful. I think, I mean, that's a useful exercise even out of that animal advocacy world, right? Like getting angry and being like, okay, where is this coming from? Where am I not feeling powerful, but how am I empowered?
Yeah. And again, I want to emphasize, it's not shaming anybody for
Right.
feeling anger, and not trying to push the anger away and saying that's not right or you shouldn't do that, because so often that's what happens, right? And
Mm,
what we see right now is so much anger from people of color, and
totally.
not seeing empathy for that anger,
Mm-hmm.
from white folks.
Shaming that anger
Right.
and just ignoring it
Absolutely. Yeah.
too, right? Just not wanting to deal with it.
Yeah. Because it feels scary or threatening, or yeah.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any like crazy success stories talking to people? You're like, oh, I never thought this person would be vegan, but we had this amazing conversation, or they ended up as a volunteer, or anything
Well,
like that?
one of my favorite success stories. I don't know what happened to this. I don't know where it went, but this conversation really uh, um, was really powerful. So I was handing out some leaflets
Mm-hmm.
several years ago about factory farming and veganism, and uh, one of the last leaflets I handed out, this guy said, the guy says, "Hey, what's this about?" And I'm like, we're trying to encourage people to choose plant-based foods and factory farming." And then he says to me, God, God wants us to use animals as we please, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, uh, I've heard this kind of thing before, and I've
Right.
seen other people respond in this way. So let me try. And I said, well, I think that God would be, um, you know, look kindly upon us if we are compassionate to animals. And he responded, have you read the Bible? Do you know what it says? And and I recognize then, I'm like, I'm not going to win this debate. I'm confident he knows the Bible much better than I do. So
Totally.
I asked something else. I asked him, do you know an animal? And he
Hmm.
said, yeah. And I'm like, what animal is that? He's like, well, I have a cat. Oh, what's your cat's name? And he said his cat's name. I'm like, well, tell me a little bit about your cat. What does your cat like and dislike? And he said a little bit. I'm like, well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to advocate for animals for like that. And he's like, oh, I see it, that you have a point. And that, I was amazed, because I cannot think of another time when I had something that seemed to be going in such a bad direction, where I'm like, obviously I'm not going to convince anybody of anything here, to changing. And I think it's so important. Personal narrative is so important, and
Mm,
really engaging with individuals, right? If I say 10 billion animals are suffering on factory farms, like, that's so hard for people to grasp or understand, or
yeah.
like connect with any emotion. On the other hand, if I tell you I met this sheep named Frederick at Soul Space Sanctuary, and let me tell you about this sheep, that's something that they engage with. And you can ask them. People have relationships with animals, often companion animals,
Right.
but whatever animal that is, that can be an opportunity. And to really avoid a lot of the philosophical things can be a trap, in a way to intellectualize things that
Mm.
often isn't very constructive. I learned some of this from doing a little bit of phone banking on the 2012 marriage amendment campaign.
I was just going to say that
Really? Yep. That's
because I was at Augsburg in undergrad at the time
yeah,
and rallying and doing stuff. And I was like, that sounds really similar to how things happened in
yeah. So my
2012.
friend Sarah, who I know from animal advocacy, she worked a lot in that campaign and encouraged me to do phone banking. And we did phone banking, and what like they pretty much tell you can't use words like justice or equality or anything like that. These are like banned words, and
Mm-hmm.
you just have to ask people about their personal experience, and about the personal experience of people they know, and tell about your personal experience and share that. And I only had a couple conversations. You make phone calls and people don't answer the phone often. But the
Right.
conversations I had were incredible, and I'm like, wow, I'm being both more persuasive and engaging people better, and build bridge building. I mean, like, it was just great, and this is somebody, I have so much experience trying to engage and persuade people on things
Right.
for so many years. I wasn't new to that, but
Right.
that was really, the ground shifted. And so since then, I've been trying to do more personal narrative. Yeah. Can I tell you about Frederick the sheep?
Please.
Yeah, so Frederick the sheep is a sheep that I met at Soul Space Sanctuary, and it's really funny. So the first time I went there 4 years ago, I see this animal come up to the fence kind of near us from the distance. And I'm like, just in my head, I made a mental note, oh, that's a goat. And then when we got closer, I realized there was a sheep, and I'm like, oh my God, what kind of animal advocate am I? I can't even tell the difference between a sheep and a goat, you know? And then a little bit later, when we're hanging out, and Frederick, the sheep, comes and like brushes up against me, like just being really friendly, but he's huge. I mean, he's a sheep and he's like
Yeah.
almost knocking me over, but it was just like kind of funny and kind of strange. And I'm like, this is really, I don't like this. I don't think that's how sheep behaved. Well, it turns out that Frederick was raised with a bunch of dogs. And
Oh,
and just learned all behaviors from dogs and just like was acting like a dog.
that's what I was thinking. I was like, it sounds like a dog that wanted
Sounds like a dog. Yeah,
attention.
this sheep that acts like a dog. And then I realized, oh, that's why I probably thought that was a goat, because goats, of course, are curious, right? And so
Yes.
that just not it wasn't the appearance as much as like the motions of that animal was more like what a goat is like, right? And so then I didn't feel quite as bad. But it's just like, the individual stories of these animals are just incredible, you know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so fun. I think some of what you're identifying too with like the asking questions of people and those personal narratives reminds me of Claire Mann, the vegan psychologist.
Yeah, I've
She's out
heard
of,
that name. I don't,
yeah,
yeah.
Australia. She's really, really great. I interviewed her a while back, but I found her right when I officially became vegan because I was struggling with how to talk to people in my life because I felt like I was going through this angry vegan phase and everyone thought I was crazy. And I was just Googling all this stuff and her name came up. And one of the things that she talks about that's helped me a lot is just really asking questions of people. And
Yeah,
that's kind of like what you were saying, like when
absolutely.
people are getting
Yeah.
defensive or people are um, unsure or their hackles are kind of coming up, just being like, oh, well, what does that feel like for you? Like, what is happening for you right now or whatever? And really just like making people name why this conversation is hard or name where their information came from. Like it's really about the personal narrative.
Yeah, and a kind of a line of reasoning that I'm curious about as well, that I think coincides with this, works well with this, is, you can ask people about the experiences they have with animals and the animals that
Mm-hmm.
they care about and the stories of those animals, but then also to ask, like, what makes that person feel powerful, right?
Mm.
And that can be a broad question, because usually when you ask these questions, people will express some compassion or care for animals. They have some relationship with animals, right? And so then the follow-up question can be, how can they feel like they can make a difference for animals? And I ask this, part of the reason I go in this direction is because, I've said that I want to look at systems and structures and not just individual consumer change. So I'm
Right.
really enthusiastic when people want to make a difference for animals in really any way, whatever
Right.
like works best for them, right? So I want people, I want to help people think about like what they would do to make a difference for animals, whatever that might look like, and would
Mm.
make them feel like they make a real difference. And one of the reasons this came up to me is, having done a lot of, uh, one-on-one persuasive, like showing videos of factory farming and then having conversations with people. I've done this, I've spent so many hours doing this, talked to thousands of people. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
the response I get, what I understood is, what I'm hearing from people is, they see these videos, they're horrified about what's happening to animals on factory farms. And then I say, oh, like you can make a difference by becoming vegan. And there's a disconnect there where they don't feel like that's powerful or important or whatever, right?
Mm.
And of course, I think it would be great if they did change their diets, but I also know that if they did something else to try to make a difference for animals, I would also really like that as well,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is. And I don't want to limit people by saying like the only thing you can do is to change your diet. And if like, and maybe when I'm getting that response from people and they could think of, they could imagine other ways that they can make a difference for animals, then they might be more willing to engage and willing to make a difference.
Oh, that's interesting. So like what are some of those other ways that if someone, let's say you have this conversation and you want to suggest other ways and they're like, well, how else can I? Like, what would you tell that person?
The easiest, nothing is easy, right? Maybe the easiest to explain is, um, like grocery stores and food companies and, dining halls at, uh, corporate dining halls or whatever, is to have them have more plant-based options.
Mm.
That, or a restaurant, any of these institutions that are serving food, is to um, uh, encourage those places to have more plant-based foods. When those are there, people will often choose them. When there's more opportunity, it's easier for people to make a change. There's a lot of good things that come that, and that isn't asking them to make I mean, they can do that without them personally making a difference. But a lot of times the obstacles that people have of, like, you had mentioned before about somebody, I only eat at vegan restaurants. It's like, well, if there's, accessible vegan food, then people are more likely to take it, right? And wants to become vegan. So that's something that I would encourage. Um, I think that being political is something that is important, and I don't know the most practical and effective things in terms of doing things at a political level with animals, but I do think that's important to work on getting candidates in office that are pro-animal and to get legislation passed. There's a couple of examples.
Those are awesome. I think that people feel more empowered when they have options. So that's a really interesting way to look at it. Like, okay, this would be great, but also like look at these options. Maybe you start here, and it feels like they have a little more control in the situation maybe than just like, well, vegan is your only option, that's it, and if you can't do it, you suck.
Right. I mean, I'd love for people to see 1,000 options, right? Just so many, and maybe not 1,000. That might be overwhelming, right?
I was like 1,000.
But just a lot of different choices, and for them to choose the thing that works best for them.
Totally. So I love doing this podcast because I have connected with amazing people who do amazing work in the world, including yourself. But something I like to ask everyone I talk to, because I think it's so important, is given all the work you're doing and all of the things you're involved in, and that's deep work, that's heart work, that's a lot. How do you take care of yourself at the same time?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, as I've said, taking care of myself is really important. I I have the privilege right now of not working that much. I only work about half time.
Okay.
And now with the pandemic, it's all from home, so I have no commute time. So I have a lot of time to spend on things. I mentioned before sleeping. I really love to cook. I try to cook healthy food. I do triathlons and train for triathlons. As soon as I say that, that sounds like pretty overwhelming to most people, but um, it sounds, maybe expensive and complicated, but I just swim laps in the lake when it's summer, and all my training for the bicycling is just commuting a lot, and I travel by bicycle a whole lot. And then running of course is the easiest thing because it's so accessible and takes time. But that's my kind of main fitness thing. I love to cross country ski and in the winter too. And spending a lot of time outside, pre-pandemic times, spending quality time with friends, regularly meditating, and really, trying to find balance in how much I take on. Because as an activist, I see so many opportunities everywhere, and and trying to like really feel into when to say yes and no.
That's something I'm still learning.
Already, I was like, I don't know, Carly, you seem to do everything. I don't know how you do all of that, just from seeing your online presence, I'm like, that is incredible that you do all of that.
Oh, thank you.
It's a balance, it's a challenge, and like when I get overwhelmed and I'm doing quote unquote too much, I try to remind myself, well, I'm doing all of this right now because I just felt so enthusiastic about these opportunities. I'm really glad that I can do it. I have a lot of gratitude for the opportunities I have. I know it comes from a lot of privilege that I have so much time and resources, and that feeling of gratitude is really important, to try to come from a place of where things feel generative and I'm doing things because of possibility, not because I'm trying to stop bad things. I mean, not to say that there aren't bad things happening, but but this is like how I am approaching the world. And I mentioned meditation, and I would say also, just kind of wisdom practices that around humility and nonviolence and compassion. And it's like, for example, in the past I had studied nonviolent communication for a number of years, and I found it to be very helpful. And
Well, that's amazing. Is there anything else that you want to share or talk about that you feel like there hasn't been space for?
No, I can't think of anything.
I'm one of those people who would always think of something like as soon as you log off. So
I probably will. Yeah.
So if people want to connect with you after hearing this, what's the best way to connect with you?
I have a website and social media at UnnyPN. That's UNNYPN. So that's Instagram, Facebook, and my website is unnypn.org.
Okay.
And you can email me or contact me in any of those forms.
Awesome. And I'll put all that in the show notes so people can get a hold of you. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It was really lovely to talk to you, and I look forward to continuing to connect with you.
Yeah. Thanks, Carly.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Consciously Clueless. If you're enjoying this podcast, hit subscribe wherever you're listening. If you want to help me get this into the ears of more listeners, send it to a friend, text it to a family member, share on social media, and tag me. Whatever you can do always helps me out. And if you really want to help this podcast grow, head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review, and you could be read on air in the future as a review of the week on my Sunday solo episodes. Until next time.